We all one step away from being dishonorable. You have to coach yourself and remind yourself and reflect every day, every week to be honorable.
There's this insidious lie that if we admit our mistakes, people will think less of us. And it turns out that again and again, when we do that,
Right.
they actually think better of us. Welcome to Science of Leadership, where we explore leadership both practically and scientifically. What makes great leadership? Why are those things important? And how can we do them well? We'll answer those questions and more through fascinating discussions with inspiring people that will leave you equipped to be a better leader. Today, we're joined by a remarkable leader whose life embodies courage, integrity, and resilience. Colonel Lee Ellis is a retired U.S. Air Force officer, former POW, and author of Leading with Honor, Leadership Lessons from the Hanoi Hilton. Colonel Ellis spent 5 years, 4 months, and 2 weeks as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and from that crucible of adversity emerged profound lessons about character, trust, and honor in leadership. We'll be talking about what it means to lead with honor, why it's so important, and how each of us can put it into practice in our lives and organizations. Colonel Ellis, thank you for joining me today on the Science of Leadership, and thank you for your service to and your sacrifice for our nation.
Thank you, Tom. And it's great to be here. And you're doing great work. And I know that you're passionate about this, and I am too. So we're going to have a good time.
Yeah, I think so. Well, Lee, if I can call you Lee,
Yes,
um,
sir.
your book, Leading with Honor, which I just finished reading this past weekend, really has impacted leaders in the military, business, and beyond. I'd like to start with setting the foundation for this conversation. So, honor can seem like an ethereal or amorphous kind of concept, I think. And so, when you talk about honor, how do you define it?
Well, I have an honor code. We had the code of conduct, 6 articles in the POW camp, and that really inspired us to stay honorable, to support our country, our teammates, and resist the enemy. And so, about 15 years ago, I came up with an honor code, and it's 7 articles. The first one is tell the truth and treat others with dignity and respect. Keep your word and your commitments. Be ethical, act responsible, do your duty and be accountable, be courageous and live your values. And those 7 articles, we've after about 4 or 5 years, we put courage in the middle because there are lots of people that want to are committed to being honorable, but without courage, they can't sustain it.
Yeah, and I would say, I'm guessing to a large degree, you would mean moral courage, right? With that, is that right?
I've never called it moral courage, but courage is to be willing to accomplish honor by taking pain and punishment if you have to. That's what we did in the POW camp. We're a bunch of old fighter pilots. Now we're outliving our peers, but we were young fighter pilots. I was the youngest guy in the camps, in my camp for a while, but there were two guys younger in other camps, but there were 5 to 8 year POWs. And so I had great leaders, and they were very courageous, and they would resist and take torture and suffer and bounce back, finally give in, give as little as possible, and bounce back and resist again. And they were real role models for us. And I wanted to be like them.
Sure, yeah.
And I think courage is that we moved courage to the center of this circle here about 8 years ago. And I didn't have one by printed out in front of me this morning, and so I just grabbed that one. But courage is in the middle because it's going to take courage to endure and to coach yourself to be honest and to be ethical and to keep your values, you know?
Yeah, that's good. I think that as I've thought about honor, it's that, the things that you described kind of hit on a number of the virtues of what we would call character, right? Character is this amalgam of these virtues.
It's really about character and strong values, for individual, for the strong values, to live up to their values.
Yeah. Yeah, and honor, in a sense, I think, is this, at least as I've thought about it and looked at it, is this idea of you have lived with character in such a way, and you hit on this, that other people hold that in high regard. They want to be like you in that way. We talk about honor cultures, right? And so Southeast Asia, Japan is a tremendously significant example of an honor culture. in the samurai and so forth, and so it was that they lived in such a way that people honored them, and so that's this would you say that's a correct sort of interpretation?
Well, I haven't thought about that before, but yes, I think, there were, kamikaze pilots from Japan in World War II, and they were committed to go die, just take off that airplane and go crash it into a ship, They were took off when they knew they were gonna die, and, I think that was because of their honor that they were committed to
Yeah.
in their culture. We're different in our culture. We have different honor. I think it's, so important today. I've written a couple of 3 blogs this summer on honor because and it's so important in our culture to hold people accountable, for people to be responsible and to be held accountable. And a lot of young people are not coming up that way these days because their parents don't hold them responsible and teach them to be responsible. One of my daughters has taught school and taught in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade in the elementary school. And when she holds somebody accountable, somebody sits down in her desk and she tells them not to, and they come back and sit down again. She holds them accountable. And the next day, their parents came in and almost cussed her out for being so mean to my kid. A lot of parents are not teaching their kids to be responsible and to be accountable and to live with honor. That's an honorable thing.
Yeah, and I think that so much more I try to keep the podcast apolitical, but
Yeah.
in our society right now, we've got plenty of people who are in high places who are not responsible and accountable to their roles,
Yes.
and that it's it's sort of like the inverse of honor, I think, right? Where
Yes. Now, I wrote this another book in a few years later, Engage with Honor, and the first chapter of this book is building a culture of a courageous accountability because people kept talking to me and said, "Why don't you write a book about accountability, accountability?" And so I did. And the first chapter in that book is about people who are not being responsible and not being honorable. And I mentioned there were more than 5 or 6 governors in jail of states, and more than 50 mayors in jail. And
yeah,
it's just going on all the time in corporate culture, in the Washington, D.C. area, and people
yeah,
who've been involved in the government work for years and years. In my hometown here in Gainesville, Georgia, there were 2 people who were wonderful, nice people. I worked with one of them, and she was sent to jail for stealing 2 or $300,000 from this charity foundation, and she was doing that for her kids. And
mm,
another person who worked for, the city of Gainesville was convicted of stealing money. And there was secretary we told one friend he was going to one doctor, and he had 2 or 3 doctors in that they had an organization, and we said, "Well, your manager is stealing money." And he said, "No, no, 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 no." Well, a year later, he said, "You were right." And these were good people that were stealing money.
mhm,
It's
yeah,
amazing. It
yeah.
tells you we all one step away from being dishonorable. You have to coach yourself and remind yourself and reflect and remind yourself every day, every week to be honorable.
Yeah, it's something we have to guard
Yes.
it, as though it's a very precious thing because it is. Thanks for establishing that cornerstone of the conversation, what honor really looks like. In my interviewing of the four-star generals and admirals, I've heard this consistently, this refrain of especially accountability, responsibility, honor, and that character is the first or most essential, if you will,
Yep.
pillar of leadership. You can't buy trust. You have to earn it every day. Just as I was mentioning, it sounds like for you that principle was tested and strengthened in captivity. And so I'm wondering, you know, expanding on what it looks like to lead with honor. Do you have a story perhaps from Hanoi or
Yeah.
one of the camps where you can say this is what it looked like to lead with honor?
Yes. Robbie Reisner was a Korean War ace, and he was the most famous fighter pilot in the Air Force. And he was captured 2 years and 2 months before I was. And so he had been there a long time. But he was a great resistor, and he would take torture. And he spent months in isolation. He spent 7.5 years as a POW and more than 4 years in solitary confinement. He was tortured many times. He would just break down when he was tortured and gave in. He would give something, but he wouldn't give much, and he didn't give what they wanted him to do, to make propaganda against the U.S. and to be anti-war and all that stuff and collaborate with the enemy. But he would give a little bit and then bounce back and bounce back again. And so he was a great representative of that, and he came up with 5 articles for us to do. Take torture up to the point of permanent physical, mental damage. Live with a code of conduct. Take torture up to the permanent physical or mental damage, and then go ahead and give in, give as little as possible, and bounce back. Stay united through communications. Pray every day. Go home proud. Return with honor. And that was it. And that was so important. There's a yin and a yang. And the yin is I'll put it on this side. The yin is your values and your strong commitments, your long-time commitments. And the other side, the yang, you got to change every day. You got to resist and shift, but you got to stay committed to your values. And he did that and was a great example. Now, the other guy, more closely, I didn't see him every day. I only communicated with him one time as a POW, and we were writing on our hands letters and stuff. And later, someone told me what he had said and what he had given out, the communications there. But Ken Fisher was a 7 years older, almost 7 years older than me, and I was flying with him in the F-4 when we were shot down. We were both fighter pilots, and we were flying over North Vietnam, and an airplane blew up, and we got captured. They caught him in his parachute before he hit a PLF, parachute landing fall, and I did a parachute landing fall and called my wingman and said, "Hey, I'm on the ground 200 meters north of the river. Start strafing, and I'm headed south." And I saw him about 6 or 7 years later, 2 years after I came home, and they said, "Well, we heard your call, but they were too close. We couldn't. We afraid we'd hit you." But Ken Fisher was a New York State wrestling champion in high school. He had wrestled at the University of Pennsylvania, and he was a tough guy and totally committed to being honorable and following the code of conduct, which is 6 articles that I mentioned, that of being faithful to your country. And he was a great example. And he took torture longer than I did, and he bounced back. But he was just a great leader and a great example. And I wanted to be like him. I just admired him and wanted to be like him. And that's a very important point, is if you are a courageous leader, everybody around you, most everybody, is going to think and be inspired by you and want to be like you, and they'll coach themselves.
Let me pause here for a second and remind our listeners that my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, is now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and essentially all online outlets. It's getting rave reviews, and I'm certain you will find it not only informative, but also inspiring. So I hope you'll order your copy today. Now let's get back to this interesting conversation. Well, Lee, I'm curious, in your experience, where would you say most leaders face the greatest temptation to compromise on their honor?
Well, in politics, they want to be accepted, and they may agree with somebody who says something that's different from them, and agree with them. We had a wonderful guy, and I knew him. He was in the state legislature and in the state government when he was running for governor, and he just had done a great job, and he was a good person. But he, all of a sudden, when he was talking with the opposition party, brought him in and talked to him a little bit, and he agreed to something, and he went downhill after that because we found out about it. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes people just don't tell the truth because they don't want to expose themselves to having made a mistake. You know, when we were fighter pilots, after every flight in formation, we debriefed. And so if you were flying with a colonel and you're a lieutenant, and you got to just tell it like it is. And I've flown with generals, and we debriefed, and I said, "Well, you kind of drifted off there, didn't you?" And smile and say, and they will say, "Yes, I did." But you got to debrief, and you got to say what we did right and what we did wrong. And so in that debrief, we would always talk about what was successful, but we'd spend a lot more time on reviewing how we got out of position and we needed to correct back.
Yeah.
And that's what I talk a lot about as a pilot. The Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels, if they debrief after every practice mission and every performance. And so what they also one the Thunderbird leader told me in the late 80s, he said, if we debrief, we rate them, okay? And very seldom are we in the 90s. We're in the 80s because we're not perfect. And
Mhm.
everybody looking on the ground is seeing them being perfect. But they debrief and critique and coach themselves to correct back more quickly. And that's what I do. If I am emotionally involved in something and I feel like I may not do the right thing, the character thing, the right thing, I'll sit down and talk to somebody that I trust and believe that sees the world a little bit differently from me and say, tell me what you think. And I'll explain it to them and they'll say, I don't think that's a good idea because this or that. And I'll think about it. And I always want to I'm committed to being honorable and living up to my character.
Mhm.
And I don't mind suffering. I've taken torture and lived in isolation for a little bit. But, the normal person who's never suffered torture to live up to code of conduct, they don't want to suffer. Most people don't want to suffer. But suffering is a part of life. And I want to encourage people to be willing to suffer uh, because be willing to suffer to live honorably, you know, and to talk to somebody, to have a team that's around you that you can, that will help you know what is honorable and what's dishonorable, and to help you stay determined and courageous. We're all
Yes,
one
sir.
step away.
Yeah, I think as I'm listening to you on this point, I think that the thing that is banging around in my head is the place we're most likely to compromise on our honor is the thing or those things that we value.
Hmm.
You talked about the lady who was at the nonprofit who was embezzling money for her kids, right? I mean, I'm sure she valued her kids, and people and some people it's just they value money, and so they fall short on the money. Or some people it's fame or it's the love of a woman
Yeah.
or whatever it may be, right? Or it's an addiction to uh, uh, an alcohol or whatever it may be. It seems like that's the place, and that gets to Sansa's admonition, "Know thy enemy and know thyself, and you should not fear the outcome in 100 battles," right? I mean,
Right.
and the hardest thing knowing our enemy is not that hard. We can study our enemy, but to know ourself, we have to be honest,
Yes.
and it's sort of like you were just saying with the Thunderbirds is we have to say, "No, we did not meet the standard there." It may look to everybody else like we met the
Right.
standard,
Right.
but integrity says, "We didn't meet the standard." How do we get better?
Yeah, I want to share a model with you. I'm going to draw it out here, but I developed a model a few years ago that insecure to secure, because when you're insecure, you've got doubts, fears, shame, guilt, anger, bitterness. That's the anchor of insecurity.
Mhm.
And so we all have that, and nobody's perfect. And so it's going to make you slide towards being more insecure. And so what we all have to do is to work to be more secure, to be more confident in ourselves, and if you're more confident and you believe in yourself, you can be humble and vulnerable. Okay. If you're not, you're either going to be proud, you're going to act with pride, false
Mhm.
pride, or insecurity and just kind of give in, or you're going to be proud and try to take over and deny and whatever that is. So we all have to coach ourselves to be more secure and slide over to being secure and to believe in ourselves. And what's going to happen to me if I do the honorable thing? You know,
Yeah.
it may be suffering for the short term, but in the end, the long term, it's gonna be more rewarding.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like currently in my professional life, that some of that's unfolding a little bit, some of what we're talking about. So, Lee, I wanted to ask, I mean, you've having read Leading with Honor and knowing, about those situations with, you know, POWs in Vietnam and so on, having read Admiral Stockdale's book, one of his books
Yeah.
and so forth. I mean, you've experienced these like the harshest conditions I think that people can experience and survive to a point of being unimaginable, I think, for most people. But thinking about leadership, not necessarily there, but I mean, in so many domains, and you've been in so many domains. But why is fundamentally, at face value, if you will, why is the concept of honor or moral integrity so essential? Why is it so important for great leadership?
Well, leadership is based on trust. Real leadership is based on trust. And trust has got to be integrity and character and living up to your values. Now, in this book here, I mentioned that, and I have a model in it, and I have a bookmark that has the model on it. The left side is not covered in the book. There's a foundations over here, but in the middle is character, courage, and commitment. That's the foundation for everything that we're going to do in our lives. And character, we've talked about that. Courage and commitment. You got to be committed. And so those three things are going to anchor you and being the person that you want to be and being a person that people respect and believe in. And that will give you confidence. If people respect and believe in you, you got a lot of confidence. You'll build up, you'll become more secure uh, every day.
So honor, you're talking about trust and people believing in you. There's a significant component of consistency or dependability, right? Like we know what we're getting,
Yeah.
which is one of the problems we're seeing in society right now. We don't know, but but we know what we're getting, and that fosters trust, which then creates the relationship and that allows us as leaders to influence those other folks to achieve the common goal that we're set out to
Yeah.
achieve.
And
Yeah.
if you're a leader, you have to care about people, let them know you care. That's so important. So we got to connect with people and let people know that you care about them, inspire them if you're a leader. And also, you've got to have the mission and accomplish objectives. And you got to hold people accountable. So you got to do both of those. And I have a seesaw. It's a balance. And 40% of the population is wired for relationships, and 40% is wired for results. And if you're going to be a great leader, you got to adapt. I mentioned General C.Q. Brown. He's an introvert. He talks about that in a podcast, and I know him. I've been to his office, and he says he coaches himself before he walks out of the office in the Pentagon. If he meets somebody in the hall, to smile and say good morning. You know, and
Yeah.
he's a great guy. And General Robin Rand is a 4-star retired, and he's a hugger. He's a relationship guy, and he learned very early because his boss called him up and said, "Robin, Rand, you got a problem down there, and we've talked about it, and you haven't fixed it. Now, if you don't fix it, it was with people, problem with people. I'm going to come down and fix it, and you're going to really regret it. You're going to be in big trouble, boy." And so they coach themselves every day to adapt, and they've learned that. And so, you got to care about people. You got to, because they'll perform better. They'll be
Mhm.
happier if you let them know that you care about them. But you've also got to hold them responsible. I fired a guy who was a flight commander, and I really cared about him. I knew him and his wife and everything, but I had to relieve him because he had very strong guys in his flight, instructor pilots, and he was not holding them accountable. And I put a guy in there and who did, and they're still all united. They're retired military, retired airline pilots, and they're still. I get emails and messages from them all the time. They're still connected because that strong leader really built the team. But the other guy that I moved out, I told him, I said, I'm going to give you another job because I didn't know about personality wiring back then, but I saw that he was a nice guy, and I made him a staff officer, and he did great work for me as a staff officer. He just couldn't manage people. So you
Yeah.
got to be one and the other if you're going to be a leader. You got to coach yourself every day and reflect on the end of the day and say, what did I do well and what did I do wrong?
Yeah. Well, for our listeners, this concept of leading with honor isn't just some form of moral feel good. It's supported by science. So, neuroscience tells us that people are wired to detect authenticity. When leaders are inconsistent, when their words and behaviors don't match, followers feel that sense of dissonance. And so, leading with honor restores coherence in what we're doing and builds the psychological safety and emotional trust that are essential to successful leadership and team performance. In a recent study in the journal Nature Human Behavior, Jen and colleagues studied honor competition, and cooperation among over 3,300 participants from 13 different societies across the world. And in that study, they found participants with higher personal values of honor were more likely to be cooperative with others, and team dynamics were improved. In another study by Simons and colleagues, among leaders who operated ethically, that is, with honor, integrity, character, fairness, those they led had higher job satisfaction and organizational citizenship, along with a greater likelihood of behaving in a similar ethical manner. So these studies show us that leading with honor helps build better and more successful organizational cultures. So again, not just some feel-good fluff, but really valuable for the sake of team performance and organizational success.
Yes, I totally agree with that because character, courage, and commitment is the centerpiece of that, and you've got to believe in yourself to do that consistently. The more you believe in yourself, doubts and fears, yes, but you believe in yourself and you correct back and you admit when you make a mistake and you work hard to not do that. But
Mhm.
everybody makes a mistake, gets off course, and you got to understand that and consistently bounce back and
Yeah.
admit when you make a mistake. You don't have to admit it to everybody. Sometimes you do, but you're going to have to admit something to yourself first and to somebody maybe there at the time. And, I have had great leaders that told me I made a mistake. I should have listened to you, or I should have done that. And I thought, you know, I really think highly of him or her, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that there's this insidious lie that if we admit our faults and failings, our mistakes, people will think less of us, and it turns out that again and again, when we do that,
Right.
they actually think better of us. I think it
Yeah.
was John F. Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs fiasco,
Mhm.
his poll numbers went up because he admitted that he had screwed up, and he
Yeah.
said, "The more I mess up, the more they like me," right? And it was really more about he was honest enough to
Yeah.
say, "Hey, I've messed this up," um, that then people said, "We can trust him. We believe in him because we know he's gonna tell us the truth."
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really important point that you're making, Lee, with that. I was thinking you've done a great job of defining, what it means to lead with honor and why it's so important. If a listener wants to begin today leading with honor, where would you recommend that they start? What kind of practical tips do you have for them?
Well, I would say download the honor code and 7 articles and use that to coach yourself every day. And I think, you can come up with your own honor code, that'd be fine. But start there and be committed. Be committed to make a mistake and embarrass yourself, but to be honorable. Be honorable and coach yourself back onto the right track of the honor code or whatever your honor is. I think that's so important, and I coach myself to reflect. I don't do it often enough, but I do it a lot, and think about what did I do this? What did I do here? And was that good or bad? Could I have done it better? Next time I will do it better. It was successful, and somebody helped me. It was successful because these people helped me here, and I need to go tell them how much I appreciate what they did.
For our listeners, we'll put a link in the show notes and description, but you'll be able to find some of these resources as well as access to where you can find Lee's books at his website, leadingwithhonor.com, and then you'll see resources and so forth on his website there. But again, we'll link that in the description. As I've been thinking about this question of what are the practical things that people can do, there's some things that came to my mind, and I'll list them off, and I'd like to get your thoughts on them. But the first is clarify your values. What do
Mm.
you truly believe in? The
Yeah.
second is know thyself, which I hit on earlier. And you just mentioned. I mean, we all have shortcomings and failures, and so I think it's imperative that we identify what those are. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's those things that we value the most that are the areas that present the greatest risk for us when it comes to honor. The third thing is do what's right. I don't know that we need to explain what that means. And then the fourth thing, which you've hit on multiple times, be responsible and accountable. Leading with honor isn't about perfection. It's about saying, "Hey, I messed up here." It's a process of progressing with integrity and character. And so, anyway, those things: clarify your values, know yourself, do what's right, be responsible and accountable. Any thoughts on those, Lee?
Our leaders in the POW camps, when they were tortured and they gave in eventually, if they were being severely tortured, being beaten, and the their they used the ropes, a pretzel, the hands, ankle, their wrists were tied together, and they would tie a rope around their just above their elbow and really tight. Okay, and then they would stand on their other elbow and cinch it up until the elbows touched. Now, you can't make your elbows touch behind your back. And so that tore out up in here. And a lot of the POWs who were tortured with the pretzel still have scars on their arms where the ropes were so tight. And so finally they gave in and they gave something. And they felt I cried the first time I was tortured, and I filled out a 3-page biography. And the only thing I had accurate, everything was a lie except my father's first and last name because I wanted someday to write a letter home. I did 2 years later, and I got a letter 2.5 years later, a 6-line letter. But they left me tied up in leg irons and in handcuffs and blindfolded in the torture room after I had filled it out, 3-page biography. And as I said, I lied about everything, but I cried like a baby. I was so ashamed that I had not been strong enough to resist and resist longer. And then I get back to my cell, 6.5 by 7 foot cell with 3 other guys. And one guy is returned early. He was there 2 or 3 hours before me. And then Captain Fisher, who I mentioned earlier, was so courageous and so strong. He came back 3 or 4 hours after I did, and he said, I gave in, and I didn't put anything true on the 3-page biography, but we did what we best we could, and gave them as little as possible, and now we got to bounce back.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Lee. I mean, again, I know these things are incomprehensible for most of us and difficult to go over for those who've experienced them. And I appreciate your sharing that with me and with our listeners. As I mentioned at the outset of the podcast, the sacrifice that you made to our nation, I really appreciate that. I'm curious, kind of as we're looking to wrap up our conversation, if you had to look back to your time in captivity, do you have a lesson that really still shapes how you lead and live today?
You just have to believe in yourself and know that you're not perfect. Get help from others and believe in the other people and know that what their strengths are. They have some strengths that are stronger than yours. Okay. They have some talents. They're stronger than yours. And they sometimes see insights that you don't see. And so you have to be willing to listen. And to do that, you have to be secure. And the more secure you can be, the better you're going to be. And I think the POWs, 95% of us were tortured, and we bounced back and stayed committed to our country and to the code of conduct, to the 6 articles in code of conduct, that we became more secure. We believe in ourselves, and that's why we are outliving our peers. We have great relationships. The Harvard study of long-term graduates is that relationships make you live longer. If you have
Mhm.
relationships, the percentage-wise of living longer is going to be much longer. And so we had community and relationships, and we were committed to each other. We would suffer for each other, and we came home more healthy. We have lower PTSD than the combat veterans from the South and from the veterans from the combats of the modern era. And so we just had happy lives. We
Yeah.
suffered, we suffered, but we came home more secure.
Yeah. And for our listeners, I really do recommend this book, Leading with Honor, to you. Lee's book. I mean, it's not just a memoir; it's a leadership manual. It's forged from his experiences in Hanoi and other places in Vietnam as a POW, guided by integrity. And you can find it on his website. But in it, you will learn some of the things that you don't. I mean, my grandfather was a POW in Germany in World War II, and some of the things that they did in Hanoi and so forth, like and again, you can read about it, but just to give you a little flavor, to get you to look into the book, they learned calculus and French and Spanish, and they had like all these pilots, educated folks who were teaching classes to each other, and that created this environment that enriched them in the face of tremendous adversity. So again, I commend that book to you, and hopefully you'll get a copy and read it. Lee, seriously, a true honor to have you on the Science of Leadership. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Tom. We had Tom Collins, POW, I roomed with for 2 or 3 years. So I remember your name, and you've done a great job today, and I thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.